Welcome, everyone, and thank you so much for joining me for our Tuesday Treasure program, where we go through some of the lesser seen objects in the museum's collection. My name is Nicole Carpenter, and I am the Director of Programs and Education at the Westport Museum for History and Culture. At the museum, we are pleased, as always, to offer this program for free. We do have a suggested donation of $5 for all of our programs. It helps support these programs and future programs. But we understand this is a difficult time, but we ask that you support the museum however you can. One of the ways that you can do this is through following us and liking us on our social media accounts. This includes being notified for future events such as tonight's program. On Facebook and Twitter, you can follow us at Westport History and on Instagram at Westport History Museum. If at any point during our program tonight you have a question, a comment, or an anecdote that you would like to share, please enter it in the comment box, and I will get to as many of those at the end as I possibly can. Tonight we are going through items related to the Second World War. We did a piece on the First World War, and I do, of course, recommend that you view that as well. But tonight we have chosen World War II, and very significantly in September. September is the month that both began and ended the war, 6 years apart. On September 1st, Germany invaded Poland in 1939, and that is also when war was declared by Britain and France 2 days later on September 3rd. On August 15th in 1945, after both of the atomic bombs had been dropped on Japan, Japan's Emperor Hirohito surrendered on its radio broadcast in Japan. The formal surrender was signed on September 2nd. Ending the conflict. This was also the deadliest conflict in global history. This was truly a global conflict, as almost every country was involved in one way or another. It is estimated that somewhere between 70 and 85 million people were killed. And in 1940, that was about 3% of the world's population. This is also the first war where casualty due to violence, direct conflict, was actually the main killer rather than disease. We know that 50 to 56 million people lost their lives to the war, by war rather, and another about 28 million were caused by disease or famine. We also know that many civilians lost their lives, and this includes the nearly 6 million, possibly more, people who were persecuted as a part of the Holocaust, which included, of course, mostly people who practiced the Jewish faith. We chose to do this program to bring some of our local history to you about this global conflict. It feels very far away, but it's not even 100 years ago, and we wanted to present some of the pieces that relate to this conflict and bring it closer to some of our viewers tonight who can maybe connect with some of these pieces. The first item that I'd like to show you all tonight is a paper item here in the front. On the home front, before we actually shift over to the European side, most people from the 1940s that were around through the conflict will remember rationing. This is, and you will of course notice that I have my gloves on tonight. These are to protect our objects. They are not latex gloves. They are archival gloves. You will recognize a ration book such as this. Things like rubber, metal, clothing, and food were all rationed. Most of it was reserved for military purposes and to support the troops overseas. Foods were shipped overseas, of course, but also gasoline and tires, clothing were all sent abroad. And there were strict limits on what was being imported. So things like coffee and tea had strict restrictions on them. Now, this book is the was the War Ration Book 1. And this item was issued between May 4th and May 7th in 1942. We know that this particular book was issued on May 5th. There's a date over here on the side, along with the registration information for the individual who owned this book. It was Romain Wright Seaver who actually signed and was the owner of these ration stamps. He was a 44-year-old man who lived here in Westport. He stood 5'5", 155 pounds, with brown hair and brown eyes. And part of the reason that these books had to be signed over, and there's actually a certificate of holder on the back, was using someone else's ration book, stealing it, or not turning in a lost ration book had strict penalties. A stolen book you could serve up to 10 years in prison or a $10,000 fine. So these were very, very valuable pieces. And what they did, for the most part, many people know, but they served as a way to get your ration of pieces. There are 3 stamps left in this book, as you can see down here on the bottom. If I lift them up just a little bit, the stamps 19, 20, and 21 still remain in this book. We know that 180 million copies of Ration Book 1 were printed, and 123 million, or just over that, were issued. And these had very, very strict date restrictions as well. You had to use them within a certain amount of time. Many of the stamps in this book specifically would have been used for sugar, but the 3 stamps that we have left here, 19, 20, and 21, were used for coffee. These were coffee stamps, and they were to be used over the course of 5 weeks, and they were valid each for 1 pound of coffee. We know that the stamps 19 through 28 were all coffee stamps, so many of them were used, but not quite all of them. Many people got around these restrictions by growing their own victory gardens. Many people will remember that from our air raid Tuesday Treasure, which we did quite many weeks ago. And we are going to show some other items that are related to that air raid unit. But people will remember from that episode that victory gardens were one way that people could get around these restrictions and grow their own food. And that was highly, highly encouraged by the Allies and the U.S. government to help alleviate some of this rationing. These 2 items here, the next that I'd like to talk to you about. The first is here. This is a flag. It is made of a cotton material, and this reads here in the center, there is a patch. It reads Defense Unit, 1776, 1941, Westport, Connecticut, and it has blue embroidery of the Minuteman statue in the center. And this patch is on both sides. There are some condition issues with this piece, so I won't be moving it around, but know that there is a patch on both sides that shows the same thing. This flag and this metal helmet, which is painted white, both belong to the Westport Defense Unit, or the Civil Defense Unit in Westport. This flag is from 1941, as it says on the patch, and this metal helmet is roughly from the same period. This helmet we know belonged to Katie Graves' father, William Graves, and he served as an air raid warden in Westport. Now, the air raid wardens, again, as I mentioned, we did a Tuesday Treasure on them specifically if you'd like to hear more about them. But in their tools or in their equipment, it included this helmet as well as a translucent eye shade, a first aid kit, an electric torch or flashlight, an air raid warden armband signifying that they were actually a warden that would have been worn around their upper arm, as well as a whistle, a rattle, and a rubber eraser. Now, these air raid wardens had all of these pieces of equipment so that they could help in the event of a bombing in Westport. The rubber eraser specifically would have been put in between the teeth when a bomb fell to protect your eardrums. If your mouth was open while a bomb fell, it could actually save your eardrums from popping. Now, all of these pieces of equipment could help with, or in the case of a bombing. And this was something that sounds a little fantastic to us today, but it was a very real fear in the 1940s through the end of the war that a bombing could come to the United States. There were many air raids that were being conducted in Europe, both over Germany and Britain, France. Of course, Britain is very, very well known for the Blitz, and air raid wardens were implemented there first. In Westport, they were implemented to not only know their sector in case of a bombing, but in case of other emergencies. They were expected to know their area or their sector so well that they could navigate it at night without any light. They were also expected to know the layout, all of the people who lived in their sector in case something happened and they needed to evacuate. Now, again, I said that bombing was a real threat in their minds. It was unlikely, but not improbable. Planes and bombers were, and including submarines, were able to travel farther and farther from Europe. And by 1942, the Connecticut State Defense Council actually issued a pocket-sized pamphlet specifically for air raid wardens, specifying that this is something that could happen in the United States. And actually, I'd like to read just a line from that pamphlet. For the people back home, and especially those along the Atlantic seaboard, may find themselves right in the front line. There was some worry that the eastern coast or the western coast from the Japanese and the Pacific would come under attack by Axis powers, and that was part of what the air raid wardens were tasked with, was helping in the case of any of these disasters. Just a few weeks ago, I led a discussion on Sigrid Schultz, and I do encourage you to take a look at that video as well, which is also on Facebook. But tonight I wanted to show you just one of the items that we went over in that discussion. This is the dog tag of Sigrid Schultz. It is very small. I do apologize for how small it is. It's not very legible, but it reads Sigrid Schultz, U.S. citizen, and then just on the second line it says T45 for her tuberculosis shot, and then it reads B for her blood type, and on the bottom corner it has a stamp for P, which stands for Protestant. Now, Sigrid Schultz was a Chicago-born journalist who lived in Berlin through World War I and World War II. And she actually rose to become the bureau chief for the Chicago Tribune in Berlin. She reported on the Nazis and their rise to power through 1942 when she was wounded in a bombing in Berlin. And she returned at that point to her home in Westport, where she lived with her mother. She returned to Europe in 1945 when she accompanied the U.S. Troops into Belgium. And she was likely issued her dog tag at that point. It may have been issued sooner, but she accompanied those troops into the liberation of Europe in 1945 and continued her journalistic career. She was a fascinating and very interesting woman. I do recommend you view our video on her specifically. There is also an article written by the museum on Sigrid Schultz that appears in the Connecticut Explored magazine that is out this fall. The next piece, which is just next to this dog tag, is a medal. This medal, if I can hold it up here for you, has this red and white striped ribbon with a clasp on the back. The medal itself has a picture of an eagle on the front, and it is surrounded circularly by the words efficiency, honor, fidelity. On the back, there is a star, and it reads, "For good conduct." Now, this is a medal that was awarded for good conduct, just as it says. This is a medal that could be received for every 3 years of good conduct, honorable and faithful service to enlisted personnel. This specific medal was given to Private Woodrow Mills, who was one of the hundreds of Westporters to join the Army and fight in World War II. Mills joined in 1943. We are not sure of the exact date that he received this medal. We do know that it would have been just after the conflict had ended. It would have been in 1946. He remained in the Army. And we know that he served in England, France, Germany, and Belgium during the Second World War. I do have also a copy of the museum's book, Westport, A Special Place, which includes an image of Woodrow Mills. Mills also served on the Civil Defense Unit, and we see him here in his Civil Defense Unit uniform, just here at the top. This is him here. And this is while he was still in Westport as a part of the Defense Unit. The next item I'd like to show you actually corresponds to this image on the same spread of A Special Place. This is an image of, this is the third selectman at the time, and the man standing next to him is Stephen Dehanos, who is also holding a painting that he has done for the Saturday Evening Post. It's one of his covers that he painted. They are both standing in front of the Westport Honor Roll. Now, this is the old honor roll. It stood on Veterans Green. There is a new version on Veterans Green today, but this, the current honor roll, is made of stone, and then also it has metal plates or plaques that have all of the names written on them or engraved into them. This old, or the first honor roll, as you can see here in the background, all of the names, they were inscribed on metal plaques. On wooden plaques, so slightly different than the plaques we have today. In the museum's collection, we have several of these original wooden plaques. Tonight, I'd like to show you the plaques for Harold Joseph and his two brothers, Robert and Edward. Now, these are the original pieces that were on that original honor roll. They are made of wood, and they still have small nail holes on either side where they were actually put in place. All three of the Donaher brothers served in World War II. They were all trained in the United States, and one of them actually served in the U.S. The other two were active in the Pacific Ocean or in the Pacific Theater. We know that all three were also first-class Army privates. And we know that all three served with distinction. So those are the items that I have for you this evening. If you have any questions, I am happy to answer them. I do, as always, thank you for joining me this evening. I am hoping to have more research done on the men and women who served in World War II. We do, of course, as with any of our armed servicemen or women, we do encourage you to take a look at the honor rolls that are on Veterans Green. They include World War I, World War II, Vietnam, Korea, and they pay homage to all of our service members who were active during these conflicts. Especially now in the fall, as the weather starts to get colder, we do encourage you to go over and take a look at them over on on Veterans Green. It really is a beautiful walk. It is just behind me, behind the museum, and just across the street from Town Hall. So once again, I want to thank all of you for joining me this evening for our Tuesday Treasure. If you have any questions in the future, do put them in the comments, and my staff and I will do our very best to come to them even after this recording is live for our audience. So thank you once again. Enjoy the rest of your evening, and have a wonderful